start our air work.
I'm dancing on the rudders to show you how I practice. It's all by feel.
Our imaginary one way.
The wind gusts are coming from the left. So that's a waste of energy. The more right rudder hots and I start aiming for lines. Put a Mooney into flat Alaska. Here I'm doing an engine out. There's not a lot of room for error. Hi, this is Janice and welcome back to Winging It. Behind me is a 2008 Mooney Acclaim Type S. I'm really excited about this video because this is, to me, very important, and I think a lot of people out there might find it quite helpful. Today we're going to be talking about stability and controllability, and the upper limits of stability are defined by the lower limits of controllability and vice versa. So the more stable a plane is, the less controllable it is, the more controllable, the less stable. There's three axes for stability, but today we're just going to focus on the longitudinal stability. I think that probably deserves the most attention. And I'm going to show you today how I practice, and I'll show you some pictures later in the video. Stick around, from flat Alaska. I don't think anyone else has ever put a Mooney into flat Alaska. So let's talk for a second about longitudinal stability. What that means is when I pull back on the yoke, the plane is pulling back against me. And when I push down, the plane is pushing up against me because it wants to go back to where it was trimmed. And that feel that you have is based on how much longitudinal stability you have. So the more stable the airplane, the more it wants to pull back on you and go back to where it was trimmed, and the less it wants to deviate from that. So in most general aviation aircraft, the center of gravity is in front of the aerodynamic center of lift. And in this plane, the center of gravity window, and this is very interesting, you may want to take a look at your own plane, but it's from 41 to 51 inches is the center of gravity envelope. And this one is actually a little bit different. The ones that have the TKS, you can imagine this as the wing is actually being moved forward a little bit. So the rear limit of center of gravity is actually no longer 51, it's 49.5. So we're going from here, which is the 41 inches, and we're only going about less than 10 inches back. And this is where the center of gravity of your airplane is. So when people are back in the back seats, or there's just people in the front seats, or the fuel's back there, everything has to eventually come within this area on your airplane. It's interesting to me how closely weighed the airplane is and how important it is to do your weight and balance. This portion of the plane is obviously pushing down, it's the center of gravity. And the aerodynamic center for a subsonic wing is going to be roughly here, but for the airplane itself, it's actually a little bit back. So that's where all changes in lift happen for the airplane. And so the lift can be represented about right here. So the lift of the wing is pushing up here, and your center of gravity is pushing down here. So what has to happen then is the tail has to push down. And you can see that the tail has a very large moment arm, especially on long body airplanes like this. There's an excellent video, it's about 15 years old now, where Major Desmond Deuce Brophy, it's on AvWeb, and I recommend you watch it, it's very interesting. He talks about God-fearing and non-God-fearing airplanes. And all airplanes obviously want to be lifted up into the air, and yet we have, on most airplanes, the horizontal stabilizer is pushing down. So that's a waste of energy. And in the F-16, he'll point out that actually is pushing up as well. So the airplane is actually uncontrollable without the flight computers. As this center of gravity is pushing down and the wing is pushing up, you can imagine as these two get closer, in other words, the further back your center of gravity is, as they get closer to each other, the tail has to push down less. And you can imagine that the feel is going to be a little bit less. So the plane becomes more unstable but more controllable the further back the center of gravity. And to measure that, we use mean aerodynamic chord as to where that center of gravity is. So in the Mooney, the center of gravity can go back past 33, it says 33.2, but that's not moving this wing forward with the TKS and moving the rear envelope limits forward. So it's actually more like 33.5% Mach. But if the similarly loaded Cirrus to what we're going to be doing today with the Mooney, we're going to be roughly at 30% Mach, and the Cirrus is roughly at 21% Mach. So just right there in and of itself makes a huge difference. Less trim drag, increased speed, increased controllability, maneuverability, and slight decrease in stability. So as these center of gravity pushing down here, is getting closer to where the wing lift is. So when it gets back to the point where it's about 40% Mach, that's what they call the neutral point, and it's pretty much uncontrollable. You pull back and the plane just wants to keep going up. It doesn't, so you actually don't have any feel for the airplane. Come with us today. I just want to show you, I'm excited on this adventure to show you how I practice. First, I'm going to practice at altitude, then we'll take it down over the runway, and I'll show you there. So we're going to be focusing on that today. Thank you very much for joining us. See you on the next one.
Clear for takeoff 21, 72 Juliet Bravo.
Stall.
November 2, Juliet Bravo, contact SoCal departure. Have a good flight.
Over to SoCal, have a great day. 72 Juliet Bravo. 72 Juliet Bravo is just letting you know we're starting to slow down to start our air work.
Number 2, Juliet Bravo, Roger, and you said it's going to be between 8,000 and 9,500?
8,000, actually it's going to be between 9,000 and 9,500 for 72 Juliet Bravo.
Number 2, Juliet Bravo, Roger, VFR altitude and routing is your discretion. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to pretend that the runway is at 9,000
Number 36 Golf,
feet.
contact Oakland Center on 128.7.
and that the runway heading is 270, the cardinal altitude. And because we're at a less dense, we're at altitude, so our true airspeed is going to have to be higher to get to that same angle back that corresponds to that coefficient of lift when we're coming in. So in order to maintain the same indicated airspeed, we have to have a higher true airspeed, so that requires actually more power. And we'll start to come down to, I believe here, the perfect descent will be between 10 and 11. And we're definitely below gear speed. We'll start down. Our gear is down, down. And we want to maintain the attitude in face of changing configurations and changing altitudes. This is great practice. This is great practice, but what's even better practice, you get it down over the runway. What makes it a little bit more challenging is down over the runway. Now you're fighting winds that are not completely aligned with the runway. So in face of winds or wind gusts. Okay, we're down at 9,100. Put the second notch of flaps on, start slowing the plane up. Only 100 feet off the runway, our imaginary runway. And we're starting to round to flare now. And when the stall horn goes off, we'll add the full power, and we'll do a go around, and the proper procedure is power flap gear flaps. It's going to start to fall as we get close to the runway.
November 02 Zulu traffic, 12 o'clock, 10 miles opposite direction.
So
and
flare.
at 8,500.
We're flaring. And start to stall now.
Stall.
And we'll hold it just off the runway, and then we'll add power.
Stall.
Trying to keep the trapezoid centered, our heading,
10 miles southwest.
and then we'll go one notch of flaps.
Number 020, I'm sorry, say the last part again?
Here it comes up.
002 Zulu, Roger. And you are in an area of higher terrain. Just want to verify your
And
terrain
holding
site.
within 1 or 2 degrees of the 70 cardinal heading that we chose. And now we're climbing, positive rate of climb. The gear came up and then the second notch of flaps. We'll do it one more time just as a demonstration. This is great practice, and you can see that the airplane in this slow flight is very, very maneuverable. But also very unstable, or as some people like to call it, squirrely. Alright, we're going to start coming back in again for another approach. Here comes down below 130. And there we go again, making sure we have our cardinal headings. With the sun in my eyes, this wasn't a good choice on the actual in my eyes. I can't really see the screen. I probably should use my compass, but we'll start coming in. First notch of flaps. Approach power settings, roughly 11. Coming down roughly 500 feet a minute or so. Second notch of flaps. Retrim the airplane. It's usually about 0 degrees. The approach angle of attack. And we're coming in now 85, perfect approach speed. Down to maintaining the 270. And the closer you hold it to a stall, obviously, the more unstable it's going to be, and when you add the power, the more of an effect that's going to have. I want to try and do this at altitude. Now we're holding it off the runway so that you know how it feels when you're over the runway and you have to add power. And now we're holding it just off the runway, 9,020 feet. And maintain. We're holding it off, and there we are on the runway, full power. Maintain the 270. Right rudder, keep the centered, and we're 1 notch of flaps while we're in ground effect. In this particular case, pretend ground effect.
55345 LA Center, the Bakersfield altimeter 29084. What's your route of flight?
Positive rate of climb. Here comes up.
Airport, Romeo Hotel Victor.
And trapezoid is pretty center. Our attitude was well maintained on that one. The second notch of flaps. 72 Juliet Bravo's done with the air work.
Now it's time to bring it down over the runway. At first I start using the vernier, but I'm going to need more rapid power changes in the face of some wind gusts coming from the left side. So I start using the push to release button on the power, and you'll see much more rapid power changes. I want to maintain attitude, and I want to use my power for up and down so that I can start touching the runway where I want, when I want, and with which wheel I want as well. And on each pass, I do a few passes as demonstration for you. And please don't practice this by yourself. Make sure you get a certified flight instructor if you decide you. And this is how I practice. It's not necessarily for everyone. And you can see that I'm making much more rapid power changes now with my left hand. And I'll do this obviously from the left seat, the right seat, just to keep my skills up. And there's the power flap gear flaps in the go around. Gear comes up. Now the second pass, each time I get a little bit more precise with what I want to do. You'll see the trapezoid's going to be off to the left a little bit, and that's because the wind gusts are coming from the left. So in an attempt to keep the left wing down, at times I will need obviously more right rudder to keep the longitudinal axis of the airplane aligned with the runway. There, I touch my wheel down first time. And I touch it again right there. And again there.
Stall. Stall.
And again there.
Stall. Stall.
As you can see, I'm not really even looking at my screens. It's all by feel and just playing with the power to let the plane up and down. When I want to touch something, I let the power out a little bit. When I want to So this is a very demanding phase of flight, and in tail draggers there's something very similar called rudder walks that we do. Obviously I'm dancing on the rudders, but nowhere near where you would be in a tail dragger. Whenever you add power, you have to anticipate the pushing over the right rudder, all to keep the same attitude of the airplane. When the Mooney is sitting on the ground, it's sitting nose high, and there's a little over a foot clearance from the propeller from the ground, and a little over a foot clearance in the with the tail hook on the rear fuselage. So there's not a lot of room for error in the long body airplanes.
Stall. Stall. Stall.
So again, I'm deciding where and when and how hard to let the wheels hit so I can really feel where my plane is at. I want to know where my paws are at all times. I like to call my wheels my paws, and I can actually feel the ground out and decide if a place is a good, if the landing strip is a good place to put the plane down or not. Again, each time I get more and more precise. I'm bleeding off my airspeed until I get to that right attitude before I let the plane come down, before I start playing with the power. And there I go, start playing with the power right there.
Stall. Stall. Stall.
And I touch my wheels very softly there on that line.
Stall.
And I touch them there again.
Stall. 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 Stall.
And again, there very softly on that one.
Stall. 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 Stall.
So the go-around procedure in the airplane is, as we talked about in the air, is power flap, gear flaps. And probably the most important reason for that is as soon as you come out of ground effect, the downwash, especially at full power, the downwash on the horizontal stabilizer starts taking more of an effect, and the nose really wants to pitch up. So you want to get that first notch of flaps off while you're still in ground effect. Here I'm doing an engine out. So this is more of a power management.
Check gear. Check gear.
And ideally, and
Check gear.
maybe I'll show this in future videos, I like to do soft field, short field, engine out maneuvers
Check gear.
so that I can really
Check gear.
do maximum energy management.
Check gear. Check gear.
That turn to final was not the important part there, but it wasn't a very good turn to final. Admittedly, it was very coordinated though, and I knew that I had plenty of room, so the more important thing was to make the runway and to keep it coordinated and get it in the right attitude for
Stall.
landing. And once I had it made, now it was time again to play with the power, and I start to deviate from one side of the runway to the other, touching one wheel, then touching the other wheel, exactly where I want to touch it down. I pick spots and I start aiming for lines.
Stall. 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 Stall.
Like there, I just wanted to put my left wheel on that one line. So thanks for joining us. As you can see, I did this about 4 or 5 times just for demonstration purposes. I could have picked a better day. Certainly was a little too gusty to really get a great feel for this. It's confidence building. However, it's a little bit more challenging, and if you're doing this for the first time, I certainly don't recommend a gusty day. I went around here about 4 or 5 times when I was in flat Alaska, and trying to touch the runway and feel the runway out with my paws there, because I was 75 nautical miles away from anywhere and only had a satellite phone, which I was lucky if it worked. And there was nobody. The census of the town the 2 years prior to that was 2 people, and when I got there, there was no one there. So it was I didn't know that at the time, but until I landed. But I had to feel the runway out, and so I think there, no exaggeration, I must have gone around 11 or 12 times, touching my wheels to different areas, finding areas that were not soft, that were hard enough, where the grass wasn't too thick, too long, where I had enough room, and so it took a little while. So sometimes you have to actually do this for real to feel out the runway. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed this and found some of it helpful. Like and subscribe, and please leave any comments down below. Thank you so much again for watching. See you on the next one.